That helps a lot. So, our first speaker of the day is going to be Anthony Visconti. He's going to give us a 10-minute speech on who moved the wall. Let's welcome Anthony.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all today. Back in 1963, as I was going into the 6th grade, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for there to be prayer in the public schools. And at that point, all prayer that I had become accustomed to in the 6 years that I was already in school, opening assembly sessions with reading from the Psalms and a prayer every morning, a practice that had been going on since we were still colonies in the public schools, had suddenly come to a screeching halt. And they based it on the constitutional provision of the separation of church and state. Now, the Constitution was ratified in July of 1787, and this separation of church and state provision was written by Thomas Jefferson, and that's a fact. But unfortunately, he didn't write it into the Constitution. In fact, when the delegates were in Philadelphia, my hometown, ratifying the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson wasn't even in the country. He was the ambassador to Spain. He didn't write any words in the Constitution. The Constitution was written and ratified when he came back to America. 14 years after the Constitution was ratified, the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Church wrote to then President Jefferson with a concern about the First Amendment. In their letter, they said the following, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of their letter. Our sentiments are uniformly on the side of religious liberty, that no man ought to suffer in name, person, or effects on account of his religious opinions. That the legitimate power of civil government extends no further than to punish the man who works ill to his neighbor. But, sir, our constitution of government is not specific. What religious privileges we enjoy as favors granted and not as inalienable rights. And these favors we receive are inconsistent with the rights of free men. Now, they had more to say in their letter, but I'm keeping it brief for time's sake. On New Year's Day of 1802, 14 and a half years after the Constitution was ratified, Thomas Jefferson replied, again in part, I contemplate with a sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature would, quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Now, he quoted that. What was he quoting? He was quoting part of the First Amendment, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And we refer to that today as the Establishment Clause, because Congress shall make no law identifying to the exclusion of all others, or to the outlaw of all other churches or religions, any one particular religion. So we call it the Establishment Clause. But this Establishment Clause, this First Amendment, has two parts. And I have yet to hear anyone on television, in the legislature, any Congress, anybody, telling us what the other part says. Let me read the whole thing again, and read the whole thing this time. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Mr. Jefferson continues, thus building a wall of separation between church and state, unquote. There are those words. That's where that wall of separation between church and state was penned by Mr. Jefferson in response to a letter to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut. Let me ask you something. For this church to write to President Jefferson, they must have seen him as an ally. He's written off today as a deist or borderline atheist, as if he was one of the founding fathers who was dead set against God or religion or anything being in the public square or in the public schools. Why would the church write to a man who opposed them? If I wanted a recipe for barbecue ribs, I'm not going to write to the president of PETA. This doesn't make sense. But I want you to think of something else. Notice how he phrased this. He was reassuring the Baptists that a wall was established, a wall of separation between church. He named church first, and that's interesting. The wall was with the church on the inside, and on the outside was civil government, who could not, because of the provision of the First Amendment, come in to fiddle with their doctrines, to tell them that they were either established or unestablished, official or unofficial, or do anything within the confines of the procedures of the church. The wall that was established was to keep government out of religion, not religion out of government. In the spring of this year, I attended a high school commencement ceremony, and it was one of the most gratifying commencements I have ever attended. A woman that I tutored for GED, passing her GED, was one of the graduates. She wanted to get her GED and become a veterinarian assistant. And I have to tell you that I have never seen a happier high school graduate than my student. And it was so gratifying to see her there. But during the commencement ceremonies, they had a minister come up. He was identified as a minister to give an invocation. Remember, this is a public high school. I don't think they called it an invocation, but when you have a minister come up to give a little opening, you assume it was one. So he got up, and he didn't say one word about God, about thank God these kids have made it through high school and blessed their progress and blessed their health and blessed this country and helped them to find jobs. And God was nowhere to be seen or heard in anything that man said. They could have kidnapped an atheist waiting for a bus and brought him to that commencement and said, these kids are graduating, say something. And maybe the atheist would have made a better speech than the minister did, but he would have been no less godless in his speech. And the thought occurred to me, what would have happened if this man said, thank God for these kids, our future? I didn't notice any lines of army boots behind the curtains of the stage, of a SWAT team waiting to pounce on this man for bringing up God into this public school, high school commencement ceremony. Would someone have called the police? There's a man up here, a minister up here in a public school mentioning God. And if the police had come, what would they have done? Would they have put him in jail? How could you put somebody in jail who's already incarcerated? In 1963, that jail cell slammed shut, keeping out the ability of Americans who brag about our religious freedom. Oh, we have religious freedom in this country. We're the leaders of the free world. He wasn't free. He was a minister. He was an ordained minister. Was he free to say, thank God for these kids? He put himself in jail by abiding by an unconstitutional interpretation and imposition on our freedom. Now, what is the role of the Supreme Court anyway? Aren't they supposed to take laws that are already passed by the Congress and run it through the filter of the Constitution to see if it either abides by the Constitution or the intent of the Founding Fathers? That's what their role is. So when they declared that praying in public school was unconstitutional, what law was being interpreted? Had Congress ever passed a law that you must pray in school? No. What the Supreme Court wound up doing was deeming as unconstitutional the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law establishing or prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Now, if in this country, as American citizens, we're going to brag about our religious freedom, I have a good idea. How about let's stop just bragging about it, and let's start acting like we really have it. Thank you.